Good morning. This is Michelle Milliken with Ecovia Solutions, and we are about to start the HMIS training for agency managers in emergency shelter, transitional housing, some VA grant per diem projects, and also HOPWA. We still looks like have, excuse me, a couple people joining, so we'll give them another minute and then we will jump right in and get started. Okay. All right. Well, again, good morning. My name is Michelle, and I'm providing this training to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, HMIS, on behalf of Ecovia Solutions. I'm fairly new to Ecovia Solutions in about 3 months, but prior to my joining the software company, I was an HMIS administrator for 12 years. So I've worked with the system for a really long time. And hopefully some of the things that we go over today, and a lot of what we'll go over today is based on the questions that you can submit during the webinar. So as we go through specific steps, whether it's a workflow or reporting, please make sure that you send in your questions. And also from Ecovia Solutions, we have Jesus and Greg, and they will be kind of monitoring those questions that come in and bringing those to the group. Tony with DCED is also on the call with us. Tony, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Tony Diaz. I'm the PA HMIS administrator. I'd like to welcome you all here this morning for our training with Ecovia. As far as policies and procedures go, even though we are upgrading to our new Client Track 19, we are still keeping all of our previous policies and procedures in place. If you look at the handout, you can see right there at the top, there's a link to pennsylvaniacoc.org, which has a wealth of information about current policies and procedures by COC. Also inside of HMIS, there is a systems documents area that can be found off of your home screen that has a wealth of information as well on how to run reports inside of our current Client Track 15. So if you do encounter any conflicts in adhering to the current policies and procedures, you can send us an email to the email register right there that Michelle is circling, and we will address those. In the coming months, we will be updating our handbook and releasing step-by-step guides after the new environment has been released and we've had a chance to access it and properly write those guides for you. So with that being said, another little note of housekeeping. Some of you may have received some emails about having your passport changed. That's in regards to the new training environment. I will be sending out later today a detailed email with access instructions and how to get into the new environment. And with that, I will turn it back over to Michelle and say thank you for attending today.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Actually, Leslie's happy about that too. I did not even think when we were working through those user accounts that folks might get an email that their password had been changed. So like Tony said, that is in regard to the new training environment. We've had multiple requests for folks to have access to this training environment. So you'll get that very soon. So just briefly, what we plan to cover today, I know that there are several people on the call that have attended at least one of the other sessions. So because this session is designed primarily for agency managers, we're not going to go step by step through the workflow process for each of the projects. Excuse me, we're going to hit some highlights of where staff, end users can kind of go off the rails a little bit while they're in a workflow. So we'll talk about some of those pitfalls. We'll talk about the required assessments, talk a little bit more in depth about submitting an issue and how those are best addressed. The majority of our time, I think I'd like to spend in the reporting section. Everybody that gains access not only to the training environment, but then when the new system goes live, everybody's going to have the same access to reports. So we want everybody to take ownership of their data, whether it's data that they input into the system or for programs that they oversee or participate with. So we want to give you the tools to assist your case managers in defining what reports are appropriate for your projects, how to generate those reports, and what do we do when we find issues related. Oh, and another note about the password. So apologize for any anxiety that may have caused for folks. So our timeline, Tony mentioned we were originally going to launch this week, but from feedback through questions, through many of the sessions that we've had, we wanted to make sure everybody had time to get into the new environment and play around. Because one of the things that we want to move to is an environment where we are not training our case managers or new users in the production environment. So any of those training organizations, training projects, training accounts, those are probably not going to be available to you going forward, because we're going to ask that you train folks in this training environment. So when we do go live, you'll get a notice, and the system will be in a read-only state for about 2 days. And that gives us an opportunity to take the data from that database, migrate it into your new configuration, and then there will be many staff that are going in and testing that data before we open back up the production environment to you. So some additional steps we'll provide as far as the immediate things that you'll want to check when you first gain access. And also check your email. So Tony or Ritu, they will be sending out additional information about when this process will start. So I'm going to go ahead. This is a handout as part of the webinar. So if you would like, you are more than welcome to download that to take notes or whatever you may need there. Okay. So our new system, so when you are training new users or you are going in and self-training, going in and practicing in the system, make sure that you are in the environment where we have the mouse with the graduation cap. And this signifies that you are in a training environment. Please, under no circumstances, use a real client file to add to the training environment. There will be your security models that are currently in place, and the new ones will not be useful or be able to be used in the new environment, because everybody's going to have access to the same organization. So you'll notice when you log in, as a refresher for those that have been with us before, you're primarily going to have the one PA HMIS 2020 user. Now, as an agency manager, you will probably have access to one other work group at this point, and we'll talk a little bit about what those differences are when we log in. So again, the organization is going to be my fake organization. So please do not panic when you log in and you don't see your organization in the list. What we've done is try to create, we have currently 16 different project types. So if you're operating a project type that you don't see in the training environment, you can either submit an issue or email that help desk, and we'll work with Tony and Ritu to get that set up in the system. But again, we're looking for project types and not specific project names. So we'll go ahead and use these settings. And so I mentioned the two work groups. Excuse me. So in the upper right-hand corner where I can go to change work groups, you'll see that there'll be a 2020 HMIS agency manager and the HMIS user. You're not going to see much difference at this point between your, your access to different parts of the system, whether you're logged in as an agency manager or a 2020 user. We've configured both of them to have the same menu options. And as agency managers may take on additional responsibilities, then you'll already have access to that new environment, and with some training, you'll have those additional functionalities. The one difference, honestly, the one difference right now that you as an agency manager will have is the ability to see domestic violence assessments. So as case managers go through the process of enrolling a client, they complete that domestic violence assessment. Typically, that is an assessment that is only viewable to the person who entered the data. And so for reporting purposes, there needs to be somebody else that can see that data, so that if we do have some issues with missing data, there is an agency manager that can go in and assist with getting that data collection issue resolved. Okay. So if we don't have any questions on work groups, I will go on in. Okay. So again, you're going to have pretty much the same menu options. In one of the things, so I already have to backtrack. So one other difference that you might see, I don't know that it's going to be set up right away. It might have to be information that's gathered throughout the next few months. But if you are listed in the system as a supervisor, you will have the ability to go in and take a look at my team. Now, because of the way my account is set up, I don't supervise anyone. So I'm not going to be able to demonstrate that to you, but we'll get some screenshots together to show you what that does. And so you can see caseload, recent case notes, things like that under the My Team area. You'll also, along with your end users, have access to change your password. Again, I'm not able to do that with my login information. So one of the first things we're going to ask you to do when you get access to the new system, go in and take a look at these open enrollments and coordinate within your agency. So we might have folks on the call that operate a 10-unit emergency shelter, maybe a capacity of 35 or 40. We may also have on the call a project with 100 units for single individuals and another 100 units for households with children. So what we would like to see is for you to do a quick review of all of the available projects that you have in the system. And if you go through the process here and you see, making some notes for our frequently asked questions. So say our agency doesn't have a runaway homeless youth emergency shelter anymore. We had it last year, but we don't have it anymore. So you want to double check that you don't have any outstanding enrollments, folks that haven't been exited from the system. And if you do, then we would want you to take care of getting those clients exited. And then you can email DCED and say, hey, you can remove this project. We don't need access to it anymore. And when I say access, it'll be put kind of in an area of the system where somebody couldn't accidentally enroll a client in that project, but you'll still maintain access to the data. So if you wanted to reapply for RI funding, you could still go in the system and run a report on how many individuals that you served when you did have that grant. So just because you see that it might go away here, that just means you can't enroll somebody in that project. Okay. So that's the first thing that we'd like you to do. So once the projects are cleaned up, especially if you look at your list and you're missing a project, that is a really high priority for us. We don't anticipate that there are going to be issues like that with the migration, but having people that look at your data every day, we're going to rely heavily on you for those visuals. Okay. So then, so that's, really kind of your first stop along the process. And so when you go into a client record, again, we have our same menu options over here on the left. So if I entered data for Justin and either myself or my agency manager goes in to run an annual performance report and notices that Justin doesn't have he has a data not collected for the domestic violence assessment. I, as the person who created it, and my agency manager are going to be the only ones that can go in and I hit review and take a look at what was entered here. Or if it wasn't collected, at the project start and the client provides that information at a later date and you need to do an update assessment, you as an agency manager would be able to assist with that. Okay. So the My Teams and the DV are two big differences. Things that you can do to really help your case managers is when they start a process, encouraging them to follow that process all the way through. So if I launch an intake, and we'll add somebody new, Greg, I'm going to add you. And again, in a Herculean effort to avoid entering duplicate clients into the system, notice when I put Greg's name is, I know that it's spelled with 2 G's. But if Greg had been served by another project and it was maybe just a verbal, hi, my name's Greg, I may have put him in the system as just with 1 G. So if I have both, that's exactly what it's going to search for. So searching by first and last name. So if you start seeing a lot of duplicate records created within your organization, take that back to kind of training and drilling down a little bit to find out how those or why that might be happening. And a lot of times people will say, well, I put all the information here, but I do want to search. If it doesn't find something similar, then it's going to start the actual intake process. And so I'm just going to go through. And Greg, I apologize. I'm not sure what your age is. I'm going to go with mine just to be safe.
That's fine. I can live with that.
Okay.
I can knock a few years off.
Okay. Well, I mean, do you want to be, 35? I mean, I'd go back to 29 if I could, but but 50's not been a bad year. So, so gender, maybe not 29.
Yeah.
So we have the same, and I appreciate everybody's levity a little bit. We've done a lot of these trainings, so we're doing our best to keep them somewhat entertaining for you as we talk about these required data elements here. So we have our HUD defined options for gender. I'm going to put data not collected on some of these just so that you can see when we go in and run a data quality report, kind of where you're going to find these issues. So for veteran status, we'll say we ask the client, has he ever served in the military, and he doesn't know. The address information, keep in mind if there's nothing here, then you won't be able to run a zip code and county report, and that seems to be something that is very popular in your organizations. And I just like to say Altoona, so that's why I always pick that. You're safe to contact, and the family information, the household information that will be created, and then the information release. And so just a quick review on the information release. Again, in an effort to eliminate the addition of duplicates into the system, when we migrate your current data, if those clients had chosen to restrict their information or have a partial sharing agreement, they're going to come over as restricted to your organization. So others in the system, would not be able to see the client's first and last name. But going forward, as we enter new clients or enter new enrollments, we're going to a shared globally concept for the client record. So the fact that the client, that Greg is in the HMIS will be visible to everyone. But what gets added below this information release sign and moving forward follows this model of either I'm allowing others to see, or Greg has agreed to share his enrollment and some of the service data that I put in moving forward. Again, two of the things that are never shared, the domestic violence assessment and the barrier assessment. Those will never be shared outside of your organization, okay? And there are a lot of benefits to sharing transactional data. And a lot of times it's how we present that question in our policies to our clients. So when I finish, just a quick review of the different types of projects and what, I'm not going to add a household member, but if I did, I'm going to do it from here. So again, just quick review. If I select, let's see, where is it? The emergency shelter, and I enroll Greg, I have one date. I have a project start date, okay? And then I can save and move forward. If I need to backdate, then I should backdate. So if he came in on Saturday, there wasn't anybody to do the data entry on Saturday. So I'm doing that today. I want to have that project start date be the 25th. For a permanent supportive housing project, I now have 2 dates. I have a project start date and I have a housing move-in date. When I do the initial data entry, it's unlikely my client's already moved into housing, okay? So the project start date may come, from a referral, documentation is in the works, but you know that the client's eligible for your project, housing has been identified, and they can move in within a reasonable amount of time. So you as an agency manager, I know that I'm touching on permanent housing here for a second. You'll want to look at those dates and how long it's taking from people to have a project start date to a housing move-in date. So if it's being, we're seeing dates of 6 months, 3 months, that's time to start having a conversation, whether it's through case conferencing internally and what that looks like. And then the last one is if it's a street outreach or a path project, you get a couple of extra dates here. So a project start date, a date of engagement, and then the date that it was determined whether or not the client was eligible for path. So I'm going to go ahead and select the shelter and save. And then this takes us through. So then based on what I selected here for my project, we'll determine on the left which of these common assessments, or if I'm a RI, emergency shelter, or let's see, a VA project, I may need to update a veterans assessment, other assessments. So if I'm a HOPWA project or prevention type project, I know when my client exits, this assessment's going to have to be completed. But again, encouraging your case managers to stay in this workflow engine, regardless of what the action is. If they stay within that workflow and they have the correct project entered, the system's going to walk them through all of the required elements. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this. And so you'll see that I've created the record. I have an enrollment, but we know I didn't complete the assessments for that. So when I go to run a report, all of the data elements except those that I've entered with name, ethnicity, and race are going to show as missing. So again, from the action wheel, I just don't even know how many times or how much I can stress. If somebody comes to you and say, hey, so-and-so got married or they had a baby, I need to add them to this enrollment. How do I do that? Everything through a workflow. So only in rare instances would we, add a household member without them being enrolled into a project. Additionally, under common assessments, it's unlikely that our project and the reporting components that go along with that. If I go over here to the common assessments, these are more for historical knowledge, historical data, and maybe if you made a mistake. But if we start making changes or just doing, if we randomly just do a universal data assessment, it's just going to hang out there. It's not going to tell us, where the client's enrolled. It doesn't create an enrollment. So again, everything through a workflow process. Greg, did we have, or Jesus?
We do have one concerning sharing of the data. Someone wants to know if the information such as services and programs will appear if a client comes in from another agency.
It's going to depend on what the current sharing model is. So until we do the update, the system's gonna operate just like it does today. But then going forward, if the client has agreed to share information, then that client's record will still be visible to the other projects within the HMIS. But if the client has determined that they don't want their transactional data shared, then you would only see information related to your organization. Currently, coordinated entry via 211 conducts the SPDAT assessments. So we are going to follow up tomorrow afternoon. There's an additional CE training, and then we will also host another couple of those as we move to the new launch. I don't anticipate the SPDAT is used as the housing needs assessment, so you will still have access to that in the coordinated entry workflow. So if for Greg here, if I had selected coordinated entry as my project, it would actually walk me through a triage assessment and a SPDAT based on the number of people in the household and then the age of the household. So that will, remain as part of that process. Life-changing. Oh, excellent question, Elizabeth. Woohoo! Somebody listened to some Guns N' Roses. Welcome to the jungle this morning. Great question. Nobody's asked this in a week and a half of training. So her question is, when you go to the action wheel, there's a life-changing event, do they go to add household member or to edit enrollment? It is to add a household member, okay? And the reason we choose add a household member is because what this will launch, so notice we have our left menu, and then we have our workflow engine. So this gives me the opportunity to add, so we'll add Jesus today. Oh, and there's no potential duplicate. We'll say Jesus was just born. Data not collected. And save and close. So I've added the household member, and then based on the age of the household member that I'm adding, obviously this might have been or wouldn't have been the same date. So the head of household may have a different project start date than the additional household members. And it's going to know that, oh, I take that back. It should take me to, oh, I didn't. Okay, so let me write this down. So what that should have done, and Elizabeth, I'm so glad you asked this question, because what the system should have done is take me through the steps to complete a disabling condition, health insurance, and barrier information for the child. And so we will get that fixed. So that's why we do that through the add household member. If I just go to edit enrollment and I add an additional client here, it's not going to step you through that process. Okay, so this is mainly the edit enrollment workflow is mainly used to, if you've made a mistake with the start date, or if it's a permanent housing or rapid rehousing that you need to add a move-in date. So that would be kind of the typical ways in which you would use the edit enrollment option. So great question. So a couple just, the update annual. So again, as agency managers, you may already have additional responsibilities as they relate to report generation, whether that's for your monthly board meetings or an upcoming grant proposal and somebody has asked you for data for that, or if it is the all-important HUD CAPER or the HUD APR, that where we find the most issues as we go through that process is that, again, folks have come over here and maybe it's a year from now, so it's April 2021, and it's time to do the annual assessment for Greg. So if you have an ESG rapid rehousing, they can stay in the project for 24 months. Maybe you do an assessment every 3 months to make sure they still qualify. When you go in, you'll have the option. So still, I'm going to make sure that everything is correct here. And then I'm going to have to make a decision. So is this a during program enrollment? So has there been a life-altering event? Unfortunately, in the time we're in right now, we may have instances where our clients were working. They are now not working. And, for most projects, we take that into account. And, maybe have to readjust that rent calculation or utility allowance. And so in order to document that, you could do a during program enrollment. But if my client had been enrolled for a year and maybe they're re-signing their lease, and it's time for that annual assessment, then you'll want to make sure that that's the option that you pick. And if I try to go through on this one for an annual assessment, I'm getting a warning. So because I selected an annual assessment, the system is telling me that his anniversary date is 4/28, and I'm trying to add an annual assessment too soon. Okay. Now, the system is going to let me move forward. The system has warned you that it's not going to count on CAPER APR, but I can still move forward. Okay, so you want to just, make sure that the correct option is chosen here. Okay. So cancel. One of the other things as an agency manager, if you have staff meetings, if you have time, where you're able to come together as a group and a team, you might have folks review on their home workspace their paused operations. Because right here, I can see that I already have 2 paused operations. And what this can do, if you have staff that have a number of paused workflows, those are probably going to indicate maybe they started a process and then figured out it wasn't the right option for them. So maybe they paused the workflow instead of canceled it. It also can indicate that we're going to have a lot of missing data if those haven't been completed. So if somebody goes back, sometimes you'll see that Greg might have 5 or 6 paused workflows. And that just means that somebody's, started those workflows. when really they should probably go in and try to resume that. And it's going to take me right back to where I left off in the process. Emergency shelters, transitional housing, I mean, things happen all the time in your environment, and it's not realistic to think that you can get through all of this information without, the fire alarm going off or the phone ringing, things like that. So that's why we have that built-in functionality to pause the workflow. Okay, we don't have any more questions. I'm going to go ahead and move into some of the reports.
No questions.
Thank you. Gives me a second to take a drink of water. Okay, so again, as we mentioned on the other webinars, there will be a change to your workspace carousel. So your home option, clients, adding providers, and then your reports. So many of you were used to seeing the majority of your reports in this home workspace. So I think we're listed down here in your current environment. So going from Client Track 15 to Client Track 19, one of the things that we tried to eliminate were things like these flyout options. And we were successful in most places. So in the client, before when you clicked on assessments, you had to play a little whack-a-mole and they would pop out here over on the side. So we've tried to make that more user-friendly. And so in that process, that allowed us to encapsulate all of your reporting into one workspace. Okay. We might have, so in anticipation of a few reporting questions, not all of your current reports will be migrated over in the beginning because one of our goals during this process is to ensure that the system is HUD and partner agency compliant. And in order to do that, we wanted to stick with somewhat HUD-defined reports that we could trust that will provide us with any of the data issues that we might need to go back and address. So if you previously had access to Data Explorer, that access should remain. You will maintain access to any of the Data Explorer queries that you had before. Keeping in mind that your current system with some of the customizations, some of the domains that might have been created, you'll just have to test those queries that you have set up to ensure that it's still pulling data from the right location in the system. So the files on server. So when you run one of these HMIS exports here, depending upon the size of the report and the type of report, so if you go in and you want to run an APR for the last 7 years of a project, that's going to take a little bit longer to generate than one, where you run it just for one project for 1 year. But this files on server, once you complete the export, this is where they land. You can anticipate anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, again, depending upon the report and how much data you've requested to be returned. And so what I did earlier today, so we have an opportunity to take a look at these reports. I'm making an assumption, and if I'm wrong, if somebody wants to type it in. But most of you as an agency manager have access to the test Sage environment. So when it's time to submit a CAPER for your emergency solutions grant, you can take this exported file and then upload it into the Test Sage environment to review your data. We know that if you've been with ClientTrack for a really long time, the APRs and the capers used to export in a fashion where you could just immediately see the data. We are continually working on that process to bring that back. But for us right now, it is a two-step process. So you'll notice I went in, I selected an APR because we had more clients in that project, but the process is the same. When you get a preload file, that's just a setup file for the data, and you're not going to use this preload data. So here's your actual zipped file with your data. And then if you have data issues, it's in this validation file where you can locate those. So if I were to go in and rerun or run an APR, notice I can select whatever date range. So if I want to run a quarterly APR to check my data quality, or look at income changes over time, or chronic homeless status, the number of conditions, I can run this report for any date range that I like. You will only have access to your organization. And then the grant program. So let's see. So if I were an emergency shelter or a COC funded transitional project, or even a transitional project that is locally funded, we want you to think about as you go through your setup that with my organization and then whatever I select here for my grant component, I want to make sure that my grant, in addition to my program, that they are available. So if you go through this process to generate the reports and you put in how you think that your grant is set up in the system. So an example might be, say I know, several years ago there was a push for more rapid rehousing and permanent housing. So some transitional programs came off of or out of that COC funding and were listed as local or other funding. And say maybe it's private funding. Notice when I select this, my grants go away. And so Ritu and Tony have been working tirelessly behind the scenes on making sure that projects have the correct setup data. So over the next few weeks, if you receive an email asking for information about, I'm trying to run an APR and, we need to follow up and get information from you about your actual funding. So even though it's a little confusing with the grant program, if the project operates like a COC transitional housing project, then that's how we want to have the grant program set up. So as a HUD COC transitional housing, and then notice my grant becomes available, as does my project. Okay, so I'll hang tight for a second and see if we have any questions about that. One of the best ways, if you are part of a local planning council or your COC board, is to review your housing inventory count and just take a look at that and how it defines how your projects are either funded or how they might be set up in the system. I thought we'd get more questions on that one.
No questions so far, Michelle.
Okay.
You're doing good.
Well, thanks. I feel like I'm going really fast. And I know it's a lot to process for folks, so I just wanted to give them a chance to get their questions in if they had any. And so even if you're not required to submit an annual performance report or a CAPR, you still have the ability to generate these reports. But again, it may take some working with DCED on the program and grant setup. But again, you know, DCED is spending an enormous amount of time ensuring that projects are set up. And this would even hold true now. So even if before we go live with the new environment, if you go in and try to run an APR or a CAPR and you're not getting, you know, information related to the grant and the program, that's something that they can go ahead and resolve now, and then it'll come over with the new migration. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let's see. I'm going to go ahead. Nobody said that they weren't familiar with Sage. I'm going to go ahead and quickly go in here. So we know that on my files on server, I know that I have my export here. Now you can see one of my other projects that I'm working on with Ecovia as a new person is finding a way that we can better name these options, because especially as an agency manager, you're going to go into the system and you might have generated a number of reports, but unless I know the exact date and time that I generated those reports, it's going to be difficult for me to figure out which one of these I'm looking for. So if we need to do a better job of the naming convention there. So I'm going to look for this 3257. So I have to download it. And then it's going to come in my bottom left here. I'm going to find it in my downloads in the Sage when I go to attach it. So I selected an APR. I'm going to choose my file. I'm going to confirm that I am, in fact, not a robot. And, oh, does not have the right number of rows. Jesus, this is the one I ran this morning. Did you happen to test the one you ran for Tim earlier?
No, Michelle, not yet.
If that populated, would you mind checking that?
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be great. Thank you. So all of a sudden, obviously, it's like a live animal show where anything can happen. So we did make some updates yesterday to the APR. And so I'm hoping, unless I selected the wrong project. Yeah, so if the files aren't what the test Sage environment expected, then you'll get this warning. And I'll be just very honest, if you get a warning like I got when I tried to upload the APR export, when I go to upload and test, if you get a structural error, you know, finding a way to take a screenshot, so, or just doing a copy. And so this gives us a perfect opening, unplanned, albeit, to submit an issue. And so in order to submit the issue, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a help button, and you can report an issue. So, and Greg always does, I'm gonna let Greg pop in if he would like. He does a great job of talking us through how to submit an issue. Greg.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm glad you're using a real world example, because when it comes down to being able to review tickets at a glance, it helps when you go to the summary, because that's what it shows us in the initial page for issues. If you can put some type of specific descriptor that it pertains to question Q5A on a report, just give us a little bit of a snapshot there, so that if others in your organization or in the COC are having the same issue, we can see at a glance that there's 5, 10 people all experiencing the same thing. It lets us know immediately that there could be a system issue. But still keep it short but concise as to exactly what's going on, so we can respond to it.
And so I'm actually going to, in a real world experience, I'm going to go ahead and submit this issue. That way our engineers will get on to resolving what the issue is. So some of the other things that are helpful is if there's the ability to attach a file or a screenshot. So because I know the file, because I know that it was this download here, the 3257, I'm going to go ahead and attach that file to my ticket. And so within this information, whoever's going to review your ticket has the ability to actually go in and look at the structure of that file and see, better determine and more quickly determine what the issue is. So I ran this. So I want to put, I'm in my fake organization.
And this is a good point, Michelle, if you allow me to interrupt a little.
Absolutely.
Especially when people are trying to troubleshoot report, it's very important to either have the report attached or at least provide some parameters so we can run the report. Part of the issue that we have to do here in support is we have to be able to replicate what you did. And if we have that information in the ticket, that actually helps a lot. Otherwise, we have to go through emails, and that takes a long time. So the more information that you can provide here for us to be able to replicate the issue, that will be really helpful and will bring us to resolution faster.
Excellent.
And in addition to that is, although that may not apply here, try to submit the ticket or the issue from the page on which you're having the issue. And that captures additional information for us that helps to diagnose it.
Yep. And so if you will indulge me here for a second, I'm, like I said, just going to submit this as an issue so our folks can so it was a COC transitional housing. So that should give our folks enough. And then message from test stage. And then data file attached. I don't remember my work phone number, so if you want to make sure that you put that in there. So anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and submit this. And as much as I dislike having errors like that come up, I'm a little bit grateful that it happened during training, just so we could provide you with that real experience. And so if I want to follow up on that issue, so under my submitted issues, you can see here. So now I have a test issue for training purposes. So, Leighton went in and, just kind of followed the procedure for me. Now this one, hopefully, because it's not a test, that they'll take a look at. And additionally, I'm going to get an email that the ticket has been submitted. And then anytime there's an update to your ticket, you'll get an email asking you to go into the issue and either provide some additional information or find out that they've resolved the issue. Okay. Okay, so access to the SAGE environment. So when I go, so what I can do is, so basically let me just go to the regular SAGE. Oh, shoot. Sorry, I'll get there, Krista. So HUD has this available, and I think you can just do the SAGE. And I'm going to add that to the attachment here for folks. And I'll put that back up at the end. And so what if I just go into the SAGE HMIS info? You'll get a screen that looks like this. Don't panic if you don't have a SAGE login, or again, even if you operate like an emergency solutions funded project, an emergency shelter, as long as your setup is correct in the system, you'll be able to go in and generate a few of these reports. So again, you don't have to have a login at all for this. So if you needed to create an account, and my guess is at this point, if you don't have a SAGE account, you probably don't need one. This would be for, typically it's the grantee that provides the final SAGE upload. There are instances in some COCs where a subrecipient would submit their own either CAPER or APR. So if maybe you have a new HUD grant and you don't have a SAGE account, but you're going to need one, you could get access by basically submitting a request. But if you just want to run a test APR or CAPER, you just go into that test and then you select. So typically with an APR, we're looking at projects that are COC funded, more housing, permanent, some transitional housing projects, rapid rehousing. And then the CAPER is what's required for the emergency solutions grant. And they are two different reports, and you saw the error message. If I downloaded one, one file and tried to upload it to the wrong report type, then I received the error that it's expecting a different file. So then basically so I had tried to do an APR, and then you can upload that zipped file. And then I wanted to show you see if I have another one that I can at least pull up here to show you. So this is what an APR looks like. The type of project information, would show at the top. I'm not going to show that for our purposes today. But this is what either a CAPER or a SAGE report in that test environment would look like. So I have my basic overview of the project. I get into my data quality pieces here. And I had purposely created data issues for us to go through in the other report. So we'll try to get in there on that one. So then data quality on income, chronic homelessness, how quickly is your staff entering the data into the system? How many people were served? Households. Then we start getting into if you have a night-by-night shelter or a street outreach project, contacted engagements. Then we get into the demographic data, age, race, ethnicity. Then we get into the barrier information. It's a really substantial report that provides you with a lot of information, especially if you want to look at things like where are your clients coming from in the prior living situation. So where were they the night before they came into shelter or into your transitional program or your HOPWA. So you can start taking a look that if I ran an emergency shelter, 7 of my clients spent the last night in somebody else's emergency shelter. Okay. One of the unfortunate things, I'm hoping a trend we don't see, is that we have folks over the next couple of months that were renting with no housing subsidy start showing up in our shelters because of our current situation. So hopefully that can get resolved. So this gives you a snapshot of income information. And I know that this is just a really high level. You can see your income changes over time. So that's why it's really important to do the correct entry workflow during program or an annual assessment, because then it tracks these changes over time. Okay, so maybe your clients all entered with some form of earned income, but over the next 6 months, maybe that income is either decreased or it's now to 0. Use the data to tell your story. So whether you're a case manager, kind of the adage, if it's not documented, you didn't do it. So if you're providing services, making referrals, updating client records, you're documenting basically your work and what you've done in the system. And then, as an overall, maybe an agency manager, while you have a hand, also in working with clients, you may be more of a program director or a program manager. And so you want to look at your outcomes, and we can all use anecdotal. I have this one client and X, Y, and Z, and this is where they ended up. But if the data doesn't reflect that anecdotal story that I'm telling, then there's a disconnect somewhere. So whether you're telling your story on the local news about some of your needs, or talking with your friends when we can all go back to having dinner in restaurants, and they ask what it is that you do, and you can talk about real specifics about how many people you served and different things. So I always like that, the data should tell your story. So then we get into, the health insurance, how long they were in your project. So there's a lot of information that's available here. And again, you can run that for any project type, just as long as when you go into the reporting parameters, that you're getting the right options here to select. Typically, you wouldn't run an APR for an emergency shelter and a transitional together. If you have multiple emergency shelters and you wanted to get a snapshot of all of them, you could certainly, select the emergency shelter and multiple grants. But sometimes, depending on how many people you serve, that's a pretty overwhelming report. So, any questions?
Along those lines, yeah, Michelle, along those lines, Elizabeth brought up the fact that in the current system, when they're doing the annual assessment report, there's a box that says include only needed assessments. But there are still assessments that are not needed in this report. How do you correct this?
Let's see, I'm rereading here. At the very end, after choosing your project. So there won't be a box. So based on the project setup that you have in the system is going to step you through the required assessments. So if, so an example might be on, so when I look at the master assessment, oh, I didn't create one for Greg. Let me find, it's this one. So if I wanted to see the type of assessments that I completed for this entry, I can view the related assessments. Now, the homeless prevention, the T-cell viral load, VASH, these aren't required, these are the only two that are required for a RIE project in addition to some of these. But it's going to step me through that process based on the type of program my client's enrolled in. So if you have an emergency shelter and maybe you have a VOC rehab or some sort of financial assistance for workforce development, and you need to track something like an employment assessment or an education assessment, those are the assessments that are not required for HUD and partner agency. So you can go in and complete this information in order to maintain the access to that data. But you're not going to have a box that you check that says only required assessments. It's all going to be based off of the project type.
She further clarified that this is when we do a report for case managers so they can do an annual assessment is more for tracking. And this is when we run reports for an annual assessment.
Okay. So, so we have the option here for an open enrollment. And then if we look for open enrollments with the most recent assessment, so if I wanted to know in my permanent housing project, so I have two folks enrolled, and this one did not have an assessment that was present. So this automatically tells me I have a data issue, that Justin does not have a master assessment for his entry. So this gives me the date of the last assessment, and then depending upon the number of days. So if I wanted to put in, 350 days to give me an idea if they haven't had an assessment within that, those number of days, then I can filter using this, and it's going to give me the list of people that don't have, or wait, is it don't have? Yes, so if they do not have an assessment within the last 350 days. So you can, anytime you get a form that looks like this with the different columns, you do have the ability to go up in your tool section, and you want to, if you wanted to export this in an Excel format, so you could sort and remove people that don't need an annual assessment yet, you can export the data in these forms to, oh, I didn't close out. That's the other thing. The system will only allow you to download one Excel file at a time, and I still have the APR up. So when I export this form, so you can do this with current enrollments. And so you can see here, I have a quick reference of the client name, the organization enrollment date, and then here we have their assessment times. So in the, as we evaluate some of the customized reports that are in the system, we've tried to create opportunities for you in the new environment to still be able to determine who might need that annual assessment. Okay, so hopefully that answered Elizabeth's question. Okay. On the files on server, I can show you, like I said, I did create actual data issues. And so when you go into run, sorry, I'm jumping back here to reports. When you go into run an APR, you have the option at the very bottom, and I would encourage this, especially if you anticipate data issues. If you generate the validation file, this is going to give you data in an Excel format where you can go in and it's going to tell you exactly what the issue is. So the example is in the this validation file that I ran here. And so these are some of those data quality and other questions related to disabling condition and barriers and income. If you look at the detailed report, I only have 2 clients in here, so it's not all that overwhelming. But if you have a project that has 150 clients, trying to sort through all of these fields to determine which client might be causing a data issue, this is overwhelming. Okay. But if I wanted to know, so I'll start with in 2. So this information in the data quality 2 is going to tell me if I have an issue with a social security number and gender, and then it's going to tell me that it's missing. So data not collected was selected in these 3 instances. Okay, on, well, 2 for social and then 1 for gender. Okay, and you can go into the client ID. Sometimes we get questions about, can I just change it in the Excel document? And the answer to that is no. You have to go back into the client record and make that update. It may remain missing. I mean, it may be that you never had the opportunity to ask the client about their social security number. So you have narratives in your reports that you submit. And so depending upon what your percentages are, just having an explanation for why those things are happening. And so if I look into, let's see what, not the one I wanted. So here, my data elements include veteran status, a relationship to head of household, and disabling condition. And so again, this header tells me what the data issue is. So for Justin, I answered data not collected for veteran status. For Charles, this is an odd one. I'm not sure I've seen that one before. Missing or more than one head of household. This can happen sometimes with merging client records. It can also happen if one of the household members exits. So say your head of household exits a project, but you're going to continue to serve the rest of the family. You'll have to go in and make somebody the new head of household. And then for disabling condition, data not collected. So as you go through some of these smaller detailed reports, you'll begin to see how you can. So here's an income and sources at start. So this just tells me that he has an issue. So this could be maybe the date doesn't match the master assessment and project start date, or Justin has a paused workflow and the case manager didn't get an opportunity to complete the workflow and they just need to go in and do that. So that is, so again, the detail report, ton of information. It's very overwhelming. But if you go in and run a data quality report, you'll get these same files that you can take a look at to kind of drill down a little deeper into your data and get some of those issues resolved. Okay. Any other questions? I know we've got about 7 minutes. Let me get everybody out on time. So is it the same? So there is under HMIS reports, if you don't want all of the additional information, I think that the APR, if you were to, save it in a document, it's like 27 or 29 pages. If you just want a quick snapshot of the data quality, you run it the exact same way. You select your grant and your program. And then if you want to see, you'll want to actually run this report twice. One, you're going to want to run the report like in a printable aggregate format. And then if there are issues that you want to take a look at and drill down on, then when you run the export, it's going to show up here on your files on server and give you that list of different Excel files outlining what the issues are. So this HUD data quality report, and again, some of the customized reports you have in your system, they're still available or will still be available in the new migration. They just might be called something a little different. So just quickly, you've got your basic client reports, some enrollment, so clients and programs. I actually prefer the active client list. It gives me some additional detail that the clients and programs report doesn't provide. If you're making referrals, you can generate these reports. And then if you want to take a look at your service summary, again, you're going to put in your parameters and just generate your report. Okay. So we have another question here. A data quality issue with something called DQ. Yeah, that might be something that is specific to your current implementation. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to answer that question specific to your current. I don't know if Tony would happen to know what this is. This might be a good email to send in to DCED and see if they can assist you with that.
And maybe also indicate how long that's been happening. It may be tied to an update in the system or something along those lines. So it helps to have the dates.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Greg. Okay, so do we have any additional questions? I know it was a lot to take in. Just really wanted to focus in on the reports, and you know, we found a couple of errors, so that's always a good day, so that we can get those things resolved. So if there aren't any more questions, Tony, do you want to close us out?
Sure, I'll close this out. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for the training. Thank you, Greg and Jesus, for participating here with us today and for everything that you've done along the way. Yes, if you have, that last one that came up was a great example of a good reason to email DCED and let us know about what you're seeing, and so that we can dig into that and get some kind of resolution for you. Again, the mailbox is posted at the top of Michelle's sheet there. And when it comes to CAPERS and APR, and also, you know, if you go into your HMIS, I'll just mention it again. You go into your current HMIS with the and off of your home dashboard, you can go to the system documents page, and you'll find step-by-step instructions for a variety of reports that you may need, some of which may be new to you. Once again, thank you for attending today. Thank you, Ecovio, for providing this for us. We are tracking the attendees, so we are keeping a list of who is attending. So if anybody wants any information on that, that will be made available as well. Once again, thank you for attending today. We have another one going on this afternoon. And with that, I'll say thank you, Michelle, and I'll turn it back over to her.
All right. Well, great, everybody. It's 10:30. Got a lot of the day left today. And so again, just in this kind of strange time that we're in, want to just pass on our gratitude for you spending some time with us this morning. So again, send us any questions, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.